You can't see it, but these children have poison in their blood. The director of the primary school in Cerro de Pasco in Peru says learning and concentration difficulties are usually the first sign.
When they sneeze, the blood often comes out of their noses. They struggle to pay attention for longer stretches of time. I'm sure it's due to the lead in their blood.
The school is right next to a gigantic open-cast mine. The crater dominates the town of Cerro de Pasco. The global economy is hungry for raw materials. But this comes at a high cost, one that many South Americans have to pay, some even with their lives. Cerro de Pasco is a town in the heart of the Peruvian Andes in Peru, and the site of a huge open-cast mine extracting zinc, silver, and lead for global markets. The mine is now owned by a Swiss commodities giant, Glencore. Glencore recently paid several $100 million for it. But the people who live here pay an even higher price. Cerro de Pasco lies at an altitude of 4,300 meters. Locals absorb heavy metals into their bloodstream through the tap water.
The lead makes us tired. It especially affects children.
My stomach hurts. My head aches.
When I ask my children to solve a problem, they quickly get tired.
Next door is a health center with a poster that reads "Lead Campaign." Everyone can get tested for heavy metals there.
We are measuring elevated values for all heavy metals, lead, cadmium, potassium, and mercury. All residents have levels that clearly exceed the World Health Organization's limits.
Peruvian journalists have documented the worst cases. Children confined to wheelchairs because their lead levels are 4 times too high. Scars from operations. Dr. Fernando Osores has researched heavy metal exposure. His study revealed alarming results.
I found the most heavy metals in children and pregnant women. The children have lead in their blood, which means they have problems with nervous system development from a young age and reduced IQs as they get older.
Una gran cantidad de desventajas en su neurodesarrollo, en sus capacidades neurocognitivas.
I have also discovered levels of arsenic, which is carcinogenic.
Adultos jóvenes. También encontramos que tenían arsénico, la gran mayoría elevados. El arsénico es un cancerígeno.
That's not just my opinion. The World Health Organization says that too.
Lo dicen organismos internacionales.
These diseases are directly linked to Peru's ruthless exploitation of natural resources for export. The whole country is in its grip. We're on our way through a barren landscape to the highest town in the world. You can smell the garbage long before you even reach La Rinconada. Hundreds of tons of waste surround the town in a ring several kilometers deep. The locals say the state has little power in this town of 50,000 people perched 5,100 meters up in the Andes. Few are originally from this inhospitable region. They came to this place to find gold. There is more gold here than anywhere else. Entire families are enthralled to gold fever, sifting through the waste from the mine to find tiny fragments of gold dust.
None of the mines are official. Everyone's in it for themselves. Nobody has a permit.
Not even the gold diggers who have driven their miles-long shafts into the mountain. 10 years ago, the gold boom attracted thousands of impoverished Peruvians to La Rinconada. When Fortunato Chuque first arrived, just a few hundred people were living in the town where nighttime temperatures can drop to minus 20 degrees Celsius.
Someone told me back then that La Rinconada had a future. It's hard, but I've stayed. I've been here almost 24 years now.
The mining companies have complete power. If you don't play by their rules, you get fired. Still, Fortunato held out. Soon he'll have earned enough to leave La Rinconada for good, but working in the shafts has left its mark on the 59-year-old.
There's particulate matter everywhere in the mines. Many colleagues die of pneumoconiosis or from gas poisoning caused by one of the underground explosions.
Once a month, Fortunato sells his gold to a trader. It's usually worth about 1,000 euros. That's a pretty good income for Peru. Here in the Wild West, people can at least scrape a living. But elsewhere, they are paying for raw material exports with their lives. A burst dam in Brumadinho in Brazil in early 2019 had fatal consequences. Vale was the mining company responsible for the disaster. Rescue workers dug desperately through the mud and sludge to find survivors among the 300 people reported missing. More often than not, they only found bodies. Some had even been buried in a bus.
A helper saw something blue shimmering. He dug with his hands and found the tire of a bus.
It was noon when the dam of the iron ore mine collapsed without warning. An employee recorded this video where he says all workers were sitting at the lunch table. The mudslide engulfed hundreds of workers and residents below the reservoir. Brown-red, possibly toxic mud flooded the valley. The emergency services saved one young couple in the nick of time. This woman also escaped from the ruins. It took just 1 hour to devastate the entire Brumadinho Valley. Distraught relatives gathered at an emergency response center. Many received trauma counseling. Most had to learn that their brothers, fathers, or uncles were still missing. So they waited, even as hope of finding survivors waned.
We'll stay here until we find out what happened.
What's happened is terrible. This is negligence.
The morning after the disaster, warning sirens sounded again. People were scared a second mudslide was imminent and fled to higher ground.
We heard the sirens at 5:30. That's when we came here with our IDs. Since then, we've been waiting and still have no information.
The police blocked off a bridge and the main road of Brumadinho. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, but it was gradually becoming clear that the mining company Vale could no longer guarantee Brumadinho was safe.
It would be even worse if there were more casualties. That's why they're sealing off the area.
The rescuers had to stop their work because of concerns that another dam above could collapse. The delay angered the families desperately waiting for news of their loved ones. Every moment was precious.
I've had no information about my husband. It's been 2 days now.
Hours later, they finally received the all-clear signal for the second dam. The rescue work could continue. Meanwhile, the people of Brumadinho were trying to come to terms with the sheer scale of the disaster. Ana Rita's 28-year-old nephew was in the canteen when the mudslide hit.
He went to work and never came back. Now he's lying there. It's incredibly sad.
People prayed for the missing at the church next door. But 4 days after the disaster, sorrow was turning to anger at mine operator Vale.
This was no accident. It was a crime. No amount of financial compensation will bring our friends back.
Vale is now under investigation by Brazil's Justice Department, which has frozen over 2 billion euros of the company's assets.
This is a human tragedy because it involves such a large number of victims.
Environmental activists protesting outside the company headquarters. They say the commodities giant invested too little in safety and oversight. Vale is one of the world's biggest iron ore exporters. Many people have accused the company of deliberately flirting with disaster in order to be able to meet the increased global demand for iron ore.
Vale doesn't own the land. The company only has licenses to mine there. And yet they can't even do that without making mistakes, contaminating rivers and killing people.
Vale is now facing probably the biggest crisis since it was founded 77 years ago. Vale used to be state-owned. The growth of the global demand for iron ore led to a rapid expansion in the 1970s. It even operates its own fleet of ships.
Vale grew to be so powerful during the Brazilian military dictatorship. It was privatized in the 1990s, but the state is still the majority shareholder.
The 2009 economic crisis hit Vale hard. The company, which is dependent on global demand, had to lay off many workers. But the past few years have seen a marked turnaround. Vale was able to cash in on increased demand for iron ore in China and Europe, and has become a heavyweight in the Brazilian stock index. The company has massively expanded its mining activities and generates billions in profits. Then, in November 2015, a dam belonging to one of Vale's subsidiaries collapsed. 19 people were killed, and Vale's operations came under increasing scrutiny.
As is so often the case in Brazil, regulations and controls may be moving in the right direction, but according to the law, there should have been 3 times as many inspectors in the disaster area to effectively inspect the reservoirs as there actually were. So you can hardly say that Brazil really takes environmental regulation seriously, which is just what the authorities had said 3 days before the accident. Although its laws are right, no government, neither left nor right, has actually implemented them.
After the Brumadinho tragedy, the authorities suspected that a Brazilian subsidiary of Germany's TÜV Süd may have been partly to blame and arrested 2 of its employees. Documents show that the 2 men had certified the dam as safe just a few months earlier, and the investigators wanted to know why. But the dam may have burst due to factors that had only come into play after the inspection. In December 2018, the Regional Environmental Agency issued the Vale Group with a permit classifying the dam as a Level 4, in other words, medium safety risk. But the minutes of an earlier environmental commission show that the risk level had previously been a 6, heightened risk. The Environmental Agency also approved an expansion of mining activity. This was significant because it also involved work around the dam. Media reports cited this as an express permit. It was issued just a few weeks before the accident and foresaw a 70% increase in production. An environmental activist from the disaster area accuses the mine operator of negligence.
The Vale Group must have noticed that something in the dam was out of whack because of its illegal activities, and then, a month before the accident, tried to get retrospective approval.
Environmental groups are calling for more rigorous state oversight.
We can see there's less oversight because the environmental authorities have been massively undercut. Even where the laws are clear, the control authorities do not have the resources to enforce them. So hardly any checks are carried out. Partly because companies are exerting enormous pressure to prevent them.
E obviamente também que a gente tem uma pressão enorme desses grandes empreendimentos.
The Vale Group has been making donations to politicians for a long time.
Contribui historicamente para campanhas eleitorais, né?
Anger about this has been rising in Brumadinho, where they are also aware this wasn't the first mining disaster. Ana Rita, the aunt of the 28-year-old who died there, is scathing about the lack of oversight.
The company knew that dam wasn't watertight. They should have fixed it. But they only think about profit, not about us.
Meanwhile, locals are left facing the environmental impact. Reddish-brown tailings slurry has contaminated the water.
We used to use this river, but now there isn't a river anymore. It's finished.
Locals like Vitor, who rely on tourism, are worried about making ends meet. It'll take months before the whole area is decontaminated. It's a disaster with both human and environmental dimensions. A lot of questions still haven't been answered, especially about lax oversight and whether it was tolerated to increase profit margins. Back in Cerro de Pasco, Peru, experts say a fine layer of toxic particles has settled over these mountains. They come from a nearby metal smelting plant. The chimney of the La Arroya smelter now releases fewer sulfur dioxide, lead, and arsenic fumes into the air than it used to. Just a few years ago, it was still running at full blast.
It never bothered us. We never left La Arroya anyway, so we thought everywhere looked like this.
The consequences of the air pollution still haunt the residents, many of whom suffer from chronic diseases. Blood lead levels are 4 times higher than the WHO's upper limits. Pablo has serious neurological complaints, but he still supports Yolanda in her fight for better environmental standards.
At first, they called us traitors. But that never bothered me, because people like Yolanda also supported us. The Catholic Church and international organizations helped us to get the Peruvian state to finally recognize the poisoning that affects us, as well as our diseases.
That's why operations in the La Arroya smelter have been scaled back, although the complex hasn't been shut down completely and continues to contaminate the area with heavy metals. Yolanda says the smelter's legacy will be felt for years to come. She's meeting Konstantin Bittner, who works for the German NGO Miserior. He spent years tracking the way German companies continue to import raw materials from Peru in spite of environmental problems.
When it comes to raw materials, Germany is very dependent on Peru. It imports a lot of raw materials, especially copper, lead, silver, gold, and molybdenum. And it would have a huge problem if the Peruvian supply chain were to break down. Concerted efforts to expose the human rights abuses or pollution caused by this supply chain are rare. There are more efforts to push things in the other direction. People writing that things are pretty good, highlighting a couple of sustainable projects. But when you visit places like this, things look a bit different.
The future of the smelter is a sensitive issue in La Oroya, one that even divides families. Some want more operations to create jobs. Others take a different view.
We need to find a balance. The smelting complex needs better filters to reduce contamination.
My main concern is the health of my children. I even argue with my husband about this. We both work in the mining industry. I expect the mine operators to act more responsibly.
One person in La Oroya who's been on the side of the victims since the very beginning is Cardinal Pedro Barreto, who also comes from a mining region. For years, he has witnessed the many deaths caused by the ruthless exploitation of mineral resources.
The church is not against mining, but we are against irresponsible mining, where the Peruvian state allows foreign companies to basically earn their weight in gold here, while at the same time causing such regrettable consequences for the Peruvian people and the environment.
But living at altitudes as high as Peru's Andes already poses health risks, especially for the dreamers and schemers in La Rinconada. A team of French scientists in 2019 set out to find out how the backbreaking labor here at 5,100 meters altitude is affecting the miners' bodies. They took blood samples from the gold miners to measure the number of red blood cells, the blood cells that transport oxygen. There is less oxygen in the thin air up here than at sea level. The scientists wanted to find out how people had adapted to these extreme conditions.
Normal person at low level, at sea level, it's about 40%. Here we measured a lot of people above 80%, which is a huge amount of red blood cell in the blood. And this helps them to bring much more oxygen to the organs, for instance, to the brain, to the muscles.
The results indicated the miners' bodies had adapted to the altitude. Their blood was thinner than normal, and stress tests revealed their hearts were working at a maximum capacity. The study was also intended to help people living at sea level.
So learning how these people here in La Rinconada can manage to live with so few oxygen, it's also a way to think how to manage patients having respiratory disease and also suffering from hypoxia at low level.
I'm only able to deal with such low levels of oxygen with the help of coca leaves.
Coca
leaves worth 5 soles, about €1.20. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do anything at 5,100 meters altitude. You can either prepare them as tea or even better, chew them. Gold digger Fortunato shows me how to do it. Even after all these years, he still feels the need to chew coca leaves, as do most of the miners here. La Rinconada seems like a ghost town to me. But Eric Ramos chooses to spend his university vacations here, laboring to extract the coveted precious metal from the ground. For this, he and his relatives begin by washing the earth and rocks. Further downstream, the gold falls through the gratings and gets caught in mats. with temperatures only around 5 degrees Celsius, it's hard work, even for a fit 21-year-old like Eric.
It's pretty tough out here in the cold. But I think I'm lucky, because we're finding a lot of gold, and we can buy furniture and stuff.
Mercury plays a key role in the process. It's used to separate the gold from the rock, but that requires repeated rinsing in the cold mountain air.
So we're mixing it here like this by adding mercury to the slurry of rock and gold. In the end, I get a mixture of gold and mercury. That's how we get the gold out of the rock.
The prospectors then pour the mix into metal pans and sift out the little clumps of gold. Unlike his father, Eric doesn't intend to work like this forever.
I'm studying on the side, and when I finish, I don't want to come back here.
What's your dream?
I want to be a teacher.
Almost everyone here once had dreams, but most of them have been shattered. Many gold diggers get stuck in La Rinconada, somewhere between bars and brothels, under the spell of gold. Before we leave, we see women in the town searching for gold specks in puddles of ice runoff and urine. La Rinconada still doesn't have running water or a sewage system. But there's a cemetery, the gold prospectors' last resting place. The cold, the poisons, and the garbage each takes its toll on people in the world's highest town. We travel a bit further into the Peruvian Amazon. We come upon the Eduardo III, an aging cargo ship loaded with pigs. Loading the ship is hard work, but Lodwig is still glad to have a job as a porter, at least until he starts to work out how much he's been carrying.
A sack of rice weighs 50 kilos, so that's 100 kilos for 2 sacks. Every day we unload a truck full, which adds up to several tons.
Lodwig and his colleagues spend about 3 hours loading and unloading the ship. Then they have to take a break. But their jobs may soon be obsolete anyway. The Peruvian government is planning to build a modern and fully automated transshipment terminal in the port town of Yurimaguas. There are few roads in the Peruvian Amazon, so nearly everything has to be transported along the river. Boxes, sacks, parcels, and livestock. Boats as small as the Eduardo III are a logistical nightmare. It takes hours before everything is stowed on board. The harbor master is already looking forward to a new container terminal. It promises to make things simpler, faster, and better.
We'll soon see some progress here. Peruvian, Brazilian, and all the other boats will soon be able to pass through all year round and carry more cargo, too.
The harbor master is hoping for a dramatic increase in exports of raw materials to China. Hidrovia, a sprawling infrastructure project involving the dredging of 3 major tributaries of the Amazon, aims to create 3,000 kilometers of deep draft channels along the river, wide enough for larger ships. A Peruvian-Chinese consortium has been set up to manage the project, which is due to start soon.
We're building an extensive system of waterways that will open up new opportunities. Right now, when the water level is low, ships can only operate during the day, not at night. This project will greatly improve transportation links.
But that's still all in the future. For the time being, traders and passengers remain dependent on boats like the Eduardo III. It will take 3 days and 3 nights to make it to Iquitos, assuming nothing goes wrong. Sain Perez is the ship's captain. He's been sailing the Amazon for 25 years. For him, it's not just a job, but a calling.
Navigating your way along these rivers is a real art. I inherited the talent from my father. I'm the only one of his sons to have carried on the tradition, and I hope that the generation after me will continue it too. It means a lot to me.
These days, the captain doesn't spend much time at the helm. He now has other people to do that task for him, like Walter Salazar, who's also been on the job for decades. Sailing in such shallow waters takes a great deal of experience.
We have to be familiar with the river and keep a lookout for shifting sandbanks. They're really dangerous. If you run into one, anything can happen. The ship can even capsize.
Smaller boats are used to move along the tributaries to the villages, where many inhabitants oppose the Hidrovia project. Relations between locals and the central government are strained. Many local people are part of the indigenous community or have indigenous roots. They've suffered a long history of persecution and injustice and are still discriminated against. Leonida Pacaya, a member of the Cucama people, is one of the last who can still speak the Cucama language.
That means, how are you and where are you from?
Today, Leonida has a visitor. Casilda Pinche is an activist who's committed to preserving Cucama culture. She fears that the new infrastructure projects will do lasting damage.
The new technology and the machines they'll bring in will have a devastating impact. It will destroy a lot of things.
The river means life, for us and for the animals. The water is everything. It's as important as having air to breathe.
The rivers and lakes of the Amazon are central to the Cucama's culture. They believe there's another world under the water where their ancestors gather and where people's spirits and animals all live together. For the Cucama, any harm to the rivers and lakes would threaten the balance of this spiritual realm. But the protests against the new water highway also have a very practical dimension. Casilda runs a painting school. She says you only have to look at the course of the river to see that dredging and channeling are a bad idea.
The river here is constantly changing. Older people here will tell you that too. Streams appear and disappear. We're not meant to interfere.
Casilda's point is one leading scientists are raising as well. Many of them have reservations about the project. One is Jorge Abad, an environmental engineer who has spent years researching the Amazon. He says the network of waterways here has shifted constantly for millions of years.
We have plenty of, let's say, different rivers, small rivers, large rivers, one that transport more sediments than other. and one that are more dynamic than others, and we never had done a characterization of these rivers. So we don't know enough.
That's why he's begun evaluating samples, satellite images, and other measurements. But a survey like this takes time, and he says the government doesn't want to wait. At the same time, the government's own surveys are inadequate. Are the commercial interests involved simply too powerful?
Basically, I mean, what I feel is that they are blind. Sometimes I think they want to remain blind because, you know, if we do a really nice research here, that may be showing that maybe you don't need to dredge, or maybe naturally the river is going to, you know, basically erosion by itself.
Dredging the river at the wrong place could have disastrous consequences, he says. It could upset the ecological balance and endanger local biodiversity. Even if existing waterways are expanded and no new roads are built, it still carries high risks. This group of young filmmakers are shooting a documentary on current environmental problems, traveling through the Amazon region to talk to local people and get evidence of environmental pollution on film. Oil extraction is a major polluter. Many of the pipelines leak. Pedro wants his video footage to show that pipeline maintenance and cleanup operations aren't working anywhere near as well as the government claims.
Here, in the middle of my country, in the middle of Peru, the reality is there's nothing other than pollution. There's no drinking water, and that makes me afraid. You can die if you drink the water here.
Pedro accuses the government of putting profit before people in the region, and he doesn't believe the Amazon infrastructure project will change anything.
Sure, they tell us how things will improve. The government says the big ships from other countries coming up here will buy our products. But that's not how things will be. Nobody's going to stop here to buy our fish. It's all disinformation.
The government rejects these accusations, saying that the hydrovia will also benefit local communities.
The indigenous people will benefit enormously. It will help them get around quicker, to the doctor, for example. The new infrastructure will make a lot of things easier. But we will have a lot of work to do, explaining the project to the people.
So it seems the government still has some convincing to do if it wants to push through its controversial plans to increase exports of raw materials. All this isn't relevant to the Eduardo III's operators right now. They just want to move their cargo as fast as possible, get it unloaded, and continue on their way. But Sain Perez still hopes to captain bigger and more modern ships up and down the river one day. He and his crew once again mastered the tricky currents and are welcomed with music. The porters quickly begin to unload the much-needed cargo. In a few days, they will leave again with a fresh load of people, cargo, and stories on his next journey along the lifeline, the Peruvian Amazon.
We arrived safely. The ship is securely moored, and nothing bad happened. That's the most important thing for me.
Back in Cerro de Pasco, Miserior staffer Constantine Bittner meets a local activist. Jaime Luis Silva Ponce publicizes the health problems caused by elevated lead levels in children's blood. He has been criticizing the lack of protective measures for years.
We have been identifying excessively high blood levels for years now. We've even had help from international institutes. But the Ministry of Health still hasn't done anything to alleviate chronic heavy metal poisoning in children.
Jaime shows us a film of children describing their headaches and nosebleeds. Both symptoms are linked to the constant toxicity in Cerro de Pasco. But to date, the activists have seen little response to their protests.
In 2017, we protested in front of the Ministry of Health for 10 days. Following that, they signed declarations of intent. But the treatment of the hundreds and thousands of children who have to live with heavy metal toxicity is only progressing slowly, and it's still inadequate. For now, children still have to live with it, and as you can see, the environmental problems in Cerro de Pasco haven't been eliminated either.
Glencore released a written statement saying the company was doing everything within its power to keep the human impact to a minimum, and that it will take further protective measures. For many children, however, these could come too late.
We feel forgotten. Compared to other cities, we've given a lot to Peru and our government, but we've got nothing back. We're much worse off than other places.
But Cerro de Pasco is just one of many places in South America caught in the stranglehold of the global greed for raw materials, places where bulldozers rip open the earth and poisons eat their way through people's bodies.